Hi guys, this is Darren from Magico Constructions. Happy to say that we're going live now. I'm just waiting for a couple of minutes for a few other latecomers that will be joining us. So let me just get things ready here on my end. We'll pop the banner on. And just making sure that we are live and all the live stream seems to be working. Okay, so everything looks to be working, so let's go live. Alrighty. Just make sure everything is up and running. Beautiful. Okay, so for today's webinar, guys, we're going to be covering basically understanding the numbers as we talked before. Essentially, we're going to be going through breaking down the numbers and in particular, looking at what makes up the preliminary cost. So we're going through what will the prelims normally tend to include. I'll run through also how you can spot out the disingenuous quotes from the legitimate ones. Just some of the little tips and tricks behind the scenes. We'll run through a real life actual project that we tendered for, so you guys can get a good sense of what to look out for when you do receive quotes from a couple of different builders. We're also going to be covering the 3 most common mistakes that people tend to make when they do select a builder, as well as some of the contract terms and some of the numbers and fine print to be aware of. Just a quick snapshot overview of Magico Constructions, how we came about. Basically, the company started all the way back in 2006 by Winston, who is my father. We started off basically doing primarily residential homes, but over the years we've been involved in different types of projects, from commercial as well as residential projects. At the moment, we're currently specifically focusing on projects within the 1 to 5 million scale, working primarily on architecturally designed projects in the eastern suburbs, as well as the lower North Shore area. I myself, I've come from a background having studied my bachelor's degree at UTS in architecture, before I then went on and studied my certificate 4 in building and construction. So that's just a quick overview of where I come from, what our company is about as a building company, before we dive right in. So let's get right into it. Looking at the numbers. So the preliminary costs. This is one of those things that I've been asked quite a few times. Is what are some of the things that preliminary costs should include, and why is it that some preliminary costs comes in higher than others? So just to break it down, basically preliminary costs, it's also known as prelims. These are basically, if you were to look at the, I guess the what do you call it, the dictionary definition of what it is, a preliminary cost. I'll just run through this. So the dictionary definition of preliminary cost relates to any expenses that are incurred during construction, which are related to the running of the project and has not been included under the materials, labor, or overheads. So it's essentially some of the most common preliminary costs that you see that builders tend to include are items like your temporary fencing, your hoarding, equipment hire, scaffolding, as well as any type of craneage costs. Sometimes when we're talking about equipment hire, we're talking about things like your scissor lift, boom lift, cherry picker, those things. So that's what equipment hire is talking about. Typically, when you look at preliminary costs, these items tend to cost roughly within the 5 to 10% of the total construction cost of the project. But sometimes consultant fees may be factored into this preliminary cost. So, in those instances whereby the preliminary costs do come in quite high, a lot of the cases it's because, the builder might have factored in consultant fees, or perhaps there's supervisor fees or management fees within that preliminary cost. So it's just a little thing to be aware of when you do come across preliminary costs that are coming up too high and past that 10% threshold. A quick suggestion, just to make things easier for you to compare apple to apples when dealing with the numbers. Try to clarify basically with all your tenderers as to what are some of the items that should be included within the prelims. So instead of leaving it up to different builders to interpret what is preliminary cost and what isn't preliminary cost, you can just clarify the whole process simply by giving them a breakdown of some of the items you wish for them to include as part of that prelims. So considering having a separate cost breakdown for these large ticket items, such as your scaffolding, as well as your mobile crane, or your tower crane, sorry, rather, that's a good idea just to make sure that, in terms of the prelims, you are comparing apples to apples. I just want to talk about one thing that, sometimes gets overlooked, and that is with your staff wages. The thing with staff wages is I think sometimes people tend to, we tend to ignore the numbers, right? So the numbers that you see right now in front of you, these are quite conservative market rates. If you were to hop on seek.com.au, do a quick search for some of these roles, these are the numbers that you'll come across. Things like your project management, your site manager, your leading hand, as well as your contract admin. Now, obviously, the rates is going to depending on the scale of the construction company that you're working with, as well as the scale of projects that you're involved in. However, these are just really the core, I suppose, the skeleton crew of most construction teams. So most construction building company would have a project manager, a site manager or site foreman, as well as a leading hand and contract admin. So just keeping in mind of those figures, and just for these roles in particular, when you look at the overall I guess the staff turnover and the company overhead, just for those wages alone for your PM, site manager, leading hand, and contract admin, that roughly equates to about $500,000 a year. So for your average residential home project, which runs for typically 1 year to year and a half or 2 years, that is a number just to keep in mind if you were expecting the builder to have a full-time project manager, site foreman, as well as a leading hand and contract admin on your project. You're expecting them basically to be able to afford nearly $500,000 on this project just on staff wages alone. And I know what some of you guys are thinking, maybe it's a bit unnecessary to have a PM on board, but regardless of the situation or the scale of the job, at the bare minimum, there should really be a site manager as well as a leading hand on the project. And in just that scenario alone, you're looking at about $200,000 for wages alone. Keep in mind that does not contain any kind of labor cost. It doesn't include any office rent. And it, of course, doesn't include any company margins or overhead. So that's one of those figures you kind of have to keep in mind. So now what I like to I'm really excited to share with you guys is some real life examples of behind the scenes from us as a building company. In particular, I want to show you guys an example of just a bit of a breakdown, essentially, of, I guess, cost codes and trade codes that you can get. So let me just pop this open on the screen in front of you. So just as an example, here is basically a trade breakdown, right? This is the kind of structure that we use here at Magico. So we normally break down our trade breakdown into insurance, your prelims, your demolition work, groundwork, concrete work, masonry, and by different trades. So just by that alone, you're looking at about 20 or so different cost categories. And within the preliminary cost in of itself, these are some of the items that we have under preliminary cost. So things like your temporary fencing, your equipment hire, you might have your supervisor fees within, your craneage cost, as well as your admin costs, safety, waste bins, things like that. And now what I want to show is a real life example of actual trade breakdown. So bear with me as I pull this up on screen. So this is a real life project example, right? So it's a residential home project, and you can see I've kind of split it down into 4 builders. A typical scenario where you get 4 builders to quote on your project, And obviously these 4 quotes have come in. You can see the highest quote here is from builder 1, which is about 1.63 million, followed by builder 2, which is about 1.57, builder 3, which is at an alarming cost of 1.2 million, and builder 4, so 1.44 million. I'll give you guys a second to just have a quick look at this rough breakdown and see if you can spot anything that really catches your eye or something that really stands out. From these figures alone, you can see there is a bit of a cost discrepancy that we're noticing here. And I think it goes without saying that builder 3's come in at a bit of a outlier number being too low. But have a look at these trade breakdowns, because this was actually the cost or trade breakdown that we were given by an architect that was doing the tender review or the tender analysis on this particular project. And I won't disclose which builder we were, but I'm happy to say we were not builder 3 that came in too low on this project. But have a look at these figures and see what really catches your eye. Have a look through the comments and see if anyone really sees anything that really stands out to them. Hi, Bankay. I can see you as well. I can see your comments rather. So let me know if you can actually spot anything in particular that stands out to you in terms of the cost before I click over, and I'll show you some of the areas of concern in this particular case. Okay, so I'm just going to go hop over to the next tab, and these are some of the areas that really stands out and is a little bit alarming in this particular case. So let's go through them one by one. When you look at the preliminary costs across the board for these 4 builders, and I'll just zoom in a little bit so you guys can see this a bit clearer. Just for the preliminary cost alone, right? You're seeing there's a bit of a difference in terms of the range from 65,000 to 89,000. Hi, Bankay. I'll just zoom in a little bit more, so hopefully this helps to make it a bit clearer on your screen, on your mobile. So yeah, all right, let's go through them one by one. So the first thing that stands out to us is looking at the labor and site management cost. What you can see over here is that in this instance, builder 1 and builder 4, they've provided a breakdown of what the supervision cost will be for their staff. So these are essentially the staff wages. Builder 2 and builder 3, for whatever reason it seems, has not allowed, or at least shown visibly and transparently, what their labor cost and site management fees are for this particular project. So if we were to just factor in this line item alone, this trade factor, just this item is looking at about 150,000 to 280,000. So when you factor that in and you come down here and look at the total cost discrepancy, essentially these 2 figures, right? You're looking at about 150 to 200,000 that's missing. And if you go down a bit further, the other thing that really stands out is the concreting cost. So if you look at the concreting cost, builder 2 has provided a concrete cost, and it seems that builder 3, builder 1, and builder 4 didn't provide any cost for concreting. In this particular instance, I think it was just a matter of the concreting being an interpretation of the driveway and external works. So I suspect this concreting cost would have been excluded from the other builders' quotes, essentially in this case. But that's about 30,000 that's unaccounted for by builder 1, 3, and 4. Coming down further down the list, you see carpentry cost. And just for that carpentry cost, the thing that really stands out is builder 2's carpentry cost. They've allowed for $190,000 just for carpentry cost, whereas the other builders have allowed for roughly the same amount, between 80,000 to 95,000. So builder 2 clearly have allowed for nearly over double the amount. So this pretty much should be quite clear in this instance that this builder is most likely a carpentry-based builder. He's probably a hands-on tools builder. that has allowed for their site management fee as part of their carpentry cost, right? The fact that they've allowed for nearly 100,000 extra, that explains why for this labor management fee, they've included $0 here. So that, that alone gives you a good understanding of the background for Builder 2. And when you move down the list, you can see that Builder 3, the reason why they've come in so cheap compared to the other builders is for some of these trades, that the prices that they've provided are just way off the mark, right? You're looking at brickwork, and the lowest quotes that received from Builder 2 and Builder 4 is 26,000. But for whatever reason, Builder 3, they've provided a cost less than half. So obviously with these trades like your brickwork as well as your structural steel, I mean, that amount for the structural steel is about 1/3 the amount that the other builders have provided. So I can tell you a little bit more background into this project. In this instance, Builder 3 was actually happened to also be a carpenter background builder. And the reason why their figure is so low for the structural steel is that they've proposed to change the structural engineers' drawings and specs, and they've allowed for a timber frame construction. So that's why their quote have come in so low, is that they've essentially changed the building material. So instead of quoting what the drawings were, which was going to be a steel or at least a light gauge steel construction, they've quoted for a timber frame construction. So that's the reason why you see over here their structural steel number is so alarmingly low, right? Which is quite a big area of concern. You come down the list further, you can see with your glazing work, Builder 4 hasn't allowed for any glazing or insulation. But when you go down to your roofing and your roof plumbing, Builder 4 has allowed for an alarming amount of $83,000. So that pretty much means that a lot of that insulation cost might have been factored into their roof framing or their roofing cost. So that explains why there's a $0 sum here for Builder 4. You come down the list further, under doors and fit out. Once again, you're seeing that Builder 2 and Builder 3 has allowed a $0 sum. So, that to me is a little bit it seems a bit suspicious. You probably have to ask them, have they allowed for any internal timber doors or external timber doors? Again, coming further down, you can see with your fit out work. Sorry, that should say fit out. Let me just fix that. That should fix out or fit out work rather. You can see Builder 3 and Builder 4 has allowed for that. Builder 1 and 2 did not allow for any fix out or fit out works. And as you come further down across the board, for your painting, electrical, the numbers are fairly consistent across the board. But the other thing that really stands out in this case, you're looking at the PC items and the provisional cost, right? So Builder 1, they've allowed for $57,000 in additional works in provisional cost, which wasn't allowed or mentioned by Builder 2, 3, and 4. So that could mean one of two things. It could mean that Builder 1 has allowed for additional scope of work items as part of their provisional sum, which the other builders have excluded. It could also mean that those provisional sum items have actually already been factored in and included by the rest of the builders, which would mean that Builder 1's price is really quite high compared to the rest, right? They've come quite a bit higher. And of course, you're looking at your builder margin. So with the builder margin, in some instances, builders probably don't like to disclose very transparently what their builder margin is on the job. But I think it's usually a good idea for you to get a grasp on how much profit the builder is making. The last place you want to be in is to, award the contract to someone that's making pretty much little to no profit on the project, because that is a very high risk thing to do. In this case, we can see that Builder 2, they've lowered the price by quite a lot in terms of the builder margin to only allow for $50,000, whereas the remaining builders have allowed for about $80,000 in profit, right? And it seems very, very hard to believe, essentially, that Builder 3 stands to make $88,000 in profit when their price is just $1.2 million. I mean, those numbers just don't add up, essentially. So that alone should pretty much eliminate Builder 3 from this scenario and leave you with Builder 1, 3, and 4. In this case, you can see the pricing across the board. They're quite close. Of course, you'd have to clarify further in terms of the provisional sum. If that was taken off, from this 1.6 quote, these figures are pretty much neck to neck almost. But you can tell quite clearly from, glancing at the carpentry costs as well as the labor site management fee. Builder 4 and Builder 1, these are builders with, a proper team behind them. They've allowed for a sufficient amount for the site and labor costs, meaning that they probably will have a full-time site manager on site to look after that project. So just off the back of that, that should give you a good grasp of this scenario, right? And if you guys got any questions, please feel free to send them through. I'll try to answer them along the way if I can. But this is just a very real example. It might surprise you to know that in this case, in this project, the successful builder out of builder 1, 2, 3, and 4 was actually builder 3. So it blows my mind personally, but surprisingly, believe it or not, builder 3 was actually awarded the contract in this case. So coming back to our PowerPoint presentation. So let's move on to the next one. So let's talk about the 3 most common mistakes that people make. So one of the first things that I see a lot of people make in terms of common mistakes is having no measurables when it comes to the tender review or tender comparison. There's a famous quote by Peter Drucker that goes along the lines of, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So in this case, if it's not measurable, you can't really compare things apples to apples. So what you want to do is basically try to make a decision that's based on reason and logic instead of an emotional decision. Now, of course, we as builders, we understand that a lot of times, especially if you're dealing with a homeowner, it can be an emotional process because you're dealing with someone's home. But it's important to have clear measurables with some objective comparison, right? So if you need any guidance though, we can send through one of our ebook, which contains the 7 key things to consider when choosing a builder. Happy to go through that in more further detail there. But just as some, quick examples of some of the measurables you could have, try to include measurables that give you a yes or no answer, answers that will give you some kind of, quantitative measure. Things like, do they have a builder license? When was the company established? Does the company come from a trade background, or do they come from a university background, in engineering, architecture, for example, or project management? Other questions like, the company, have they completed similar work before in the past? Have you been able to visit some of their current projects or past projects? Does the builder have any systems or processes in place just to ensure consistency and for them to ensure that they can deliver a good construction quality on your project? Those are some of the measurables that you should be looking at and you should be making a decision based off of. Always try to avoid choosing a builder just based on the cost factor alone. I know it's sometimes very compelling when a client has a limited budget in mind, but the worst thing you can do for your client is to advise them to pick the builder that's the cheapest. Because we've seen time and time again, and I'll share with you guys an actual real life example of a project a little bit later, whereby the client made a decision just based on cost alone. In most cases, the result is never good. So just try to avoid doing that, and more importantly, try to cross-examine the quotes that you receive and the information you provided. Sometimes we find during this process of tender review that a lot of times there's no tender interview questions being asked. It's a good idea to really ask the builder some questions regarding the project details. This way you can really gauge the builder's understanding of the project. And that pretty much brings us to the number 2 common mistakes that people tend to make, and that is not doing the due diligence. Look into the company's history as well as their staff background, but more importantly, check the validity of their insurances and licenses. I've heard of one horror story whereby the builder provided the client with a homeowner warranty insurance. It wasn't until the project was slated for occupation occupation certificate, so OC, at the very end of the project, the PC actually picked up that the homeowner warranty that the builder provided turns out that it was actually fraudulent. So the builder had actually photoshopped this homeowner warranty certificate. So that was a whole, as you can imagine, it's a whole insurance nightmare because now the project's been built, but it's been built illegally, essentially. So just do the due diligence to just double check, those insurances and license that you do receive are indeed legitimate. You can go online to fair trading website to make sure that the builder license is valid. You can give iCare a call just to make sure that homeowner warranty, or HBCF as it's now called, is in fact valid. And speak to past clients, in terms of past projects that the builder have completed. When a builder gives you a past client referral or reference, it would be nice and ideal if you could visit that past project and talk to the client on site just to verify that that is indeed the past client. And speaking to past consultants and contractors, one little tip I can give you guys is that you can tell a lot about the builder just by the way that they interact with their team of subcontractors. I'm sure you've come across builders that, would yell a lot or swear on site to their site staff and their subbies. And, in a lot of those cases, it's not a good working environment. And in that case, if the working environment isn't very pleasurable, isn't very good for all the subbies, usually the end result of that project is not going to be that good. So have a look, talk to past consultants, talk to past subcontractors, see what their thoughts are or their impressions are of the builder. And if they hold the builder in high regards, especially the subcontractors, chances are that's a very good builder and a very good contractor. And like I mentioned before, try to ask some questions to the builder just to gauge their understanding of the project. Moving on to number 3, that's the lack of trust. I've come across a lot of instances whereby the relationship between the builder and the owner, or the builder and the architect, the relationship starts off on the wrong foot. I'm not saying you have to be the best friend with the builder by any means, but you should really try to engage a builder that you can trust and develop some kind of a good working relationship with the builder. After all, in most cases, if it's a project that's going to take about a year or over a year, you really want someone that you quite like that person, right? You don't want to work with a builder that you don't trust. I'll give you some examples of whereby the relationship starts off the wrong foot. I've seen cases whereby during the signing of the contract, either the owner or the architect, they've put in some really harsh contract terms. Things like putting in a really high liquidated damages amount, something to the amount of $1,000 per day, trying to shift all the blame to the builder, trying to get the builder to account for all the inclusions and take on all the risks that's to do with the project. You don't really want to set that relationship off on the wrong foot. I understand where people are coming from, where you want to put in a liquidated damages cost, but understand that it goes both ways. If you put in a high liquidated damages cost, the builder is going to be factoring in additional time for him to safely deliver the project to avoid paying that liquidated damages. It just goes without saying. So try to be fair is what I want to say, but also try and get a good sense that you want to work with someone that's going to be fair and easy to work with, and instead of someone that's quite sus, right? Other instances include adding additional scope of works without wanting to pay the builder. This happens a lot with alteration addition projects, whereby the scope of works just constantly gets increased and added on, as you know. That's another example that the relationship can really start to sour. Before the contract even gets signed and before the construction begins, you should come into an agreement with the builder in terms of setting up regular meetings and updates. It doesn't need to be daily by any means, but there should be some form of consistent reporting from the builder to the architect as well as the owner. So there's a bunch of different project management tools out there that you can use for those site reporting and logs. You can use something called Builder Trend. There's Procore. There's Aconex. There's a bunch of different softwares out there, regardless of which software you choose, make sure that there is an agreed meeting schedule for regular updates to be provided by the builder. And one of the other things that happens sometimes with these relationships is that there's a mentality of an us versus them. And what I mean by that is sometimes the builder can feel as though they're fighting against the architect, or they're fighting against the owner, or maybe the owner wants the architect to fight against the builder, pitting one party to the next party. Try to avoid that mentality, because at the end of the day, it's all about teamwork, right? It's all about collaboration. So teamwork makes the dream work, as they say. So try to make sure that there is no mentality of this us versus them. Don't try to exclude one party during meetings. And of course, it goes without saying, don't try to hold meeting behind another party's back. Try to make things as transparent as you can, basically. And the other thing is just that lack of appreciation. I mean, at the end of the day, no one wants to feel unappreciated and receive no acknowledgement for a work well done. Doing just little things like sending the builder maybe a job well done card or a Christmas present, or just to as like a bit of a token of gratitude, perhaps, when a job is being done quite well, or perhaps the job's going ahead of schedule. Those little things can really help to really strengthen the relationship. And in any event that a variation does occur, it can really help soften the costs as well. It's just about being reasonable with the builder at the end of the day. So this is a case example I wanted to share with you guys. Unfortunately, it's a real project. I wish this was a fictional project, but this is a real project. It's a project in the eastern suburbs. Not going to go into details for obvious reasons. But in this particular case, the client made the decision to choose a builder just based on the cost factor alone. The cost of the project should have costed around $800,000 for this alteration addition project. They ended up awarding the contract to a builder that quoted them, I think it was a little bit over $500,000. The client didn't do any reference check on the builder. It was only later on, when problems started to arise, that the owner found out that this builder actually turned out to be a swimming pool builder, and they had just only recently gotten their builder license to conduct any type of residential home construction, really. This project has been delayed by over 9 months now. It's still ongoing, to my knowledge. The original builder is now walking away, and of course, the client is now taking him to court. So I think these images speak for themselves. You can see just from the photos how unorganized this job site is. What you're seeing over there in terms of this photo over here, that is meant to be the balcony. So unfortunately, no waterproofing has been done correctly. These holes that you see, these were where the balustrades were and had to be taken off. It's just one of those cases, right? Like whereby none of the proper procedures were taken, and the owner made a very emotional decision to go by price. So now they're in a situation whereby they've already paid the builder over $500,000 because there was some variation involved, and they now have to get an external builder in to step in and to really take on this half-completed project through to completion. So in most likelihood, it's going to cost them more than what it would have costed to begin with. So one last thing we're going to cover for today is just the contracts and some of the contract options and some of the fine print to be aware of. There are obviously quite a lot of different options when it comes to your construction contract. The most common ones we see are from HIA, so that would be the Housing Industry Association. The advantages of the HIA contract is that it is usually quite straightforward and the terms are really easy to understand from a layman perspective. It's usually used for residential home alteration, addition, renovation kind of scale projects. Most common ones that we come across are usually the New South Wales residential building contract for renovation and addition, as well as the residential building contract for new dwellings. The MBA, of course, refers to the Master Builder Association. And the most common contract from them is the BC3, so that's for the commercial use, and BC4, that's the residential contract. And then you've got, of course, the ABIC. So this is probably something that we come across the most often these days. It stands for Australian Building Industry Australian Building Industry Contracts. Sorry, it's so usually this is more suitable for projects whereby there's going to be an architect that's going to be administering the contract and staying on board as the contract admin for the project. Most common one used is, of course, the ABIC Simple Works housing contract for New South Wales 2018. That's the most common one. And of course, the other one is the Australian standards, the AS 4000, I believe. This was basically created with a joint committee from the Standards Australia, as well as the Standards New Zealand group. Sorry, we don't really tend to come across too often the Australian Standards contract, but I have heard from some people that it is the preferred contract. The one that we normally tend to be involved in would probably be the ABIC contract, just simply because we tend to work with architects. And in an instance that we do work with homeowners directly or developers, we tend to usually come across the MBA or HIA contracts. So some of the terms to be aware of, they say that the devil is in the details. And of course, what that means is, some of the details, you really have to look through the fine print to be careful. Because there's so many different contracts and each contract is different on its own in terms of the layout of the contract. I thought we just covered the most common contract that we come across, and that's the ABIC contract. So with the ABIC contract, some of the areas to be aware of is looking at the security of payment section within the contract. And what I mean by this is, in terms of security of the payment from both the owner to the builder, as well as what the builder can provide to the owner. So as an example, from the builder side, builders can provide assurances in the form of liquidated damages, retentions, bond, defect liability periods. Those are just some of the examples. But from the owner side as well, it's important to note that a lot of builders will ask also that the owner provide some kind or demonstrate to the builder that the funding is available for the contract sum. So the way that could be done is either via the funding approval. The owner just has to show that the builder that the funding has been approved successfully for the right amount, which will contain, which would basically be able to see them afford the construction cost, or perhaps set up a joint account with the owner and the builder. That sometimes does happen as well, depending on whether bank financing is involved. Pardon me. So one other thing to be aware of is just the insurance side. I know I've mentioned this a little bit earlier during the webinar, and it just goes without saying, just try to make sure that you do ensure that the builder's license and everything that they are providing you are legitimate. So cross-check with the New South Wales Fair Trading website that the builder license is valid. Make sure that they have valid workers' compensation, contract works insurance, and of course, like I mentioned before, the Home Building Compensation Fund, HBCF, also used to be known as the homeowner warranty. Just give a simple quick call to iCare and just make sure that that certificate number is valid and legitimate. And more importantly, they have insured the project to the right amount. So that's one other thing that gets often overlooked. Have a handling of your project delays and variations. So have the conversation with the builder prior to the commencement of the project in terms of how any variations will be handled, as well as how any project delays will be handled. So it's important to note that if no completion date has been provided up front or no construction program has been provided up front, this should be a bit of a warning sign that the builder has no construction program and no real management system in place. What this means is if there is no construction program and along the way, certain key critical task items do get delayed, then the builder essentially will have no way to foresee a delay in the completion of the project. So we always will provide our clients with a construction program prior to the signing of the building construction contract. So it's important to, I guess, just not overlook the importance of having a program. One other thing you might look out for is see what is the proposed builder margin that the builder is suggesting or proposing for all variations. So what I mean by that is some builders, they might offer a really low, what seems to be a really low construction cost, but the handling of the variations might be something quite high, like a 25% builder margin, for example. So in that instance, it's quite clear that the builder is intending to make profit based on any variations that's likely to occur on the project. And in which case, it's one of those things to look out for is to compare the builder margin percentages across the different builders that you're speaking to. You may also ask from the builder, of course, at this stage, a list of their labor rates for their trades. This can be provided upfront, of course, so that everyone is on board with what would be the cost for your plumber, electrician, gyprocker, carpenter, for example, on an hourly basis. Having that set up beforehand just really basically sets you up so that you avoid any kind of arguments later down the track. Last thing you want is to get hit up by the builder for a variation, and you look through the cost breakdown and they've included something that's quite ludicrous, like $200 per hour for a painter or something along the lines of that. So of course, that's a bit of a crazy example, but that's just one of those things to look out for. So some of the suggestions we would like to give you for today is consider maybe adding in just a bit of a special condition clause in your contract so that you can filter out between the builders that are really looking at your project in detail versus the builders that are simply giving you a square meter rate, rough dollar figure kind of quote. One funny example I can think of that we recently came across was an architect that actually deliberately added in a dress code stipulation that the builder has to wear a pink tutu and a tiara. I think it was on the first day of each month. And they just put in that clause within, I think it was about, literally hundreds of pages that we had to read through. We're talking like specifications, the contract details. Obviously, we picked it up when we flagged it with the architect. But that's a very good example, right? To put in there in your contract clauses, just to make sure that the builder is looking at the fine line and the builder is looking at those documentation clearly. Other thing that you can do is just try to be reasonable with the liquidated damages. Keep in mind that if you have a high LD or liquidated damages, that's going to put off a lot of builders when they come across that figure. And what a lot of builders do to offset that high liquidated damages amount is that they'll either buffer in a lot of additional days or weeks for the construction to be completed, or they'll try to back charge you and increase their rates for any extension of time. So it kind of goes both ways. So it's important to be reasonable from that sense. Other thing to really look at is to compare the builder's margin for PC items and variations. You should be probably expecting variations to occur, especially on projects like alteration and addition projects. And in those instances, that proposed amount for the builder margin is going to be quite important. As I mentioned previously, you don't want to really engage a builder that has a builder that's going to propose a really high builder margin in terms of how they handle any variations. So budget for at least 5% contingency sum on any kind of projects that's going to be alteration and additions. That's the bare minimum that you should be allowing for in terms of contingency sum. And we often tell that to client and architects as well, is to at least budget for 5%, ideally 10% in contingency sum for alteration and addition projects. The other thing you could do is, of course, to provide your tenderers with the same tender format and trade breakdown. What this does is this enables you to conduct a true tender comparison between the quotes that you receive from the builders. try to be as detailed as you can regarding the scope of works, because what this does is this avoids any cases of exclusion clauses that the builder might try to put in there. Also request for the chosen builder to provide you with a construction program. From this, the construction program itself, you should be able to get a grasp on the builder's understanding of the project, as well as this will give you an insight regarding the builder's professionalism and their project management system that they have in place. So those are some of the suggestions that we would give you in terms of the contract and of what you should be looking out for. The pink 22 clause is a pretty common clause. I got to say the pink 22 clause, for us, it was a bit of a first time we come across that one. But the recipe for chocolate cake is definitely something new as well. I think we might put that in there for our special terms and conditions as well, maybe for our trades, just to make things interesting, So coming back to the summary, so overview of what we've covered today. We've gone through in quite a bit of detail in terms of what the preliminary costs should include, as well as how you can spot out, the disingenuous quotes that you do receive from builders. I've shown you a little bit of the behind the scenes from a builder's perspective, in terms of what it takes to really, get a construction quote together and what to look out for. One thing I might show you guys now on this topic is I'll give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek on the cost codes that we have here at Magico. So I've shown you the trade breakdown. This is a real life example of our cost codes that we use. So you can see it goes from insurance, preliminary, demolition work, groundworks, concrete works. It goes down. I'll just scroll through quickly. Roofing, metal works, timber doors, fit out works. There's literally, I think, about 500 different cost codes we have. Let me just go back to that. So coming down, yeah. So it goes. We have cost codes of nearly 500 different cost codes. So for us to really generate a quote on any projects, it typically takes us about 3 to 4 weeks. And the reason why it takes so long is that we're going through in detail each of these cost codes to derive our final figure. So that's also one of the reasons why sometimes we will charge clients to release our full breakdown of the cost, is because that it takes us quite a long time and a lot of investment of our resources to be able to provide an accurate quotation. So also we covered today is 3 most common mistakes that people tend to make on construction projects, as well as the contract terms and numbers, what to be aware of, as well as some of the fine line, basically. Which brings us to probably one of the parts that I'm really excited for is one of the giveaway times. So I think I've got here a list of people that are still in attendance. Okay. So if you're listening to this right now, what I'd like for you to do is just type in a comment and just say Merry Christmas. If you just say Merry Christmas or provide any type of comments, we'll send through something for you as a bit of a Christmas gift, as a thank you for your time. I'll wait a little bit because there's a bit of delay between the live stream and when it goes out. So I'll wait until someone sent through a comment and just says Merry Christmas. Hi, Tony. I'm glad you're finding it to be very useful. Thanks. Okay, so I've got the first one that came in, Amrish. I think Amrish just beat you by just a little bit. So he messaged. So because you're the first one to say Merry Christmas, Amrish, the next time we catch up, which is probably soon, I'll get you your Christmas present. So you'll be getting a copy of this book, which is very applicable. It's talking about remote working, especially with everything that's happening with COVID. You'll get that as a present, as well as some pens, some USB pens, I should add. So just wanted to say a massive thank you for all the people that have attended the webinar today. Huge thanks to Tony, Amrish, Benkei, Dimitri, Gonzalo. I think that's all the people that I've got at the moment. Vinesh, who is here as well. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, guys. That's it for today. We'll probably run another one of these webinars in the new year, maybe before Christmas, given the time of things. I know we're entering the peak of Christmas time now. But once again, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for your time, and I hope you found this webinar to be of value for you, and to give you a bit of insight into how builders approach the whole process and how you can spot out the differences between the quotes. If you got any questions or anything like that, please feel free to get in touch. Simply send me an email or give us a call or visit our website, and I'll be more than happy to clarify any kind of questions that you might have regarding this webinar. So that's pretty much it for today, guys. Thanks so much for your time, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.